Hello everyone. So I'm going to start with a rather jolting quote from this book that we're looking at. So everyone knows, or certainly should know, that indoctrination is not genuine teaching, and that the results of indoctrination are the very opposite of genuine learning. Yet, as a matter of fact, much that goes on in the classrooms of our schools is nothing but indoctrination. The results that are measured by our standardized tests are not products of genuine learning.
So today we're going to talk about Billington's classroom of Mortimer Adler's theory and constructivism. I'm Devin Eisenstadt. This is Anna Law. We're from St. Mary's University, not in Halifax, here in Calgary. Actually, just in case we had a couple questions last time. And the quote that we just read was from Mortimer Adler's theory, Reforming Education. We're going to talk more about that. Little story, we took education psychology in the beginning of our first year of first year of teaching education with pre-service teachers. This is our last semester, last practicum. We're very excited. We had constructivism, and we have another theory that we're going to talk about, which is behaviorism. And our class clashed on what we should do in the classroom to instruct either constructively or behaviorally, and it kind of divided us. And then we kind of came together and we're like, oh, it's okay, or we still like each other, so it's okay, we didn't kill anybody. Not yet, at least.
So I come actually from that side that in our class when we were debating behaviorism and constructivism, I was very much on the behaviorist side because I was seeing it very much the dichotomy, looking at behaviorism very much versus constructivism and seeing them in the purest forms. So I'm someone who came from that side to seeing the light of this side. So behaviorism is very much direct instruction. The teacher lectures, the students listen. It's very heavily scaffolded. We look at the form of I do, the teacher, you do, and we do. It's often the one that's implemented the most in schools today. We looked at Industrial Revolution learning because this kind of stemmed around from the time of the Industrial Revolution, which we'll talk about a little bit more later. An example of behaviorism is B.F. Skinner, who looked at famous examples of rats, I believe, in the lab, and positive and negative reinforcement. And to quote Jodie Carrington, who I saw at teacher conventions, we're using what we saw with rats on children today. And behaviorism is very much teacher-led.
I was on the opposite side, so I already saw the light. I was arguing with Anna on the far side of the room, being like, you should come to the light. Like Luke Skywalker or something. So I was on constructivism, which means that students construct their own meaning of learning, right? So there's minimal scaffolding, like there's minimal help that the teacher is giving them, but there is some help. We're not just going to give them something to be like, learn it now, children. So I don't think that's going to help us very well. It's very much student-led instruction, and it's minimally implemented in schools. It's hard to implement, and we're going to talk more about Mortimer Adler's theory of why it kind of connects with this theory and why we agree with this theory.
Okay, so this is Mortimer Adler's book. He was an American educator and thinker, and one of his main ideas was the concept of paideia, so that general learning should be in the possession of all human beings. So everyone should be able to learn, not just some certain class or some certain race or some certain gender. Everyone should be able to get the same high standard of learning. And for the sake of this presentation, we're just going to focus on his book, Reforming Education. He has many books, in which Adler proposes a new model for education. And I'm going to pass this around so you can take a look at it if you like. So again, all people should be able to receive an education, but not only that all people receive an education, but all people should receive a better education. We look at the industrial model of rote memorization. We also looked at how this looks at Bloom's taxonomy. So a lot of what's implemented in schools nowadays is much lower levels of Bloom's taxonomy, while Mortimer Adler looks at getting to those higher levels of thinking. As students are nowadays, they're kind of limited to just memorizing the information. So I have a little meme here because I love them. But you memorize the facts, you take the test, and then the information is completely gone because all you did was just surface memorization rather than actually learning the knowledge and having more genuine learning. Adler also thought that lectures should be kept to a minimum, so it shouldn't be all the time that the teacher's just standing up here and talking at you, which we were very sad that we had to just keep it to this time of just lecturing at you, because that's not the way we want to do it in our own classrooms, but for sake of time, that's what we're doing. And Adler also looked at a more classical model of education. So not in the time of Industrial Revolution, but way, way back when there was the Greeks like Socrates who would teach his students to actually think for themselves.
So the Industrial Revolution model, oops, I don't know what happened. Okay, so basically I found two pictures and I wanted to show you how our classrooms haven't really changed very much in style of how they sit, where the board is, where the teacher is, how they're instructed, they're in little pods. I actually was musing that their classroom looks a lot better than this one for some reason, and I don't know why, but it just does. And the Industrial Revolution, when we were having public education come around, was actually a revolutionary idea. At the time of the 19th century, like there was people that were like, this is radical. The people, since there was a class system, at least in Western society, I'm talking about that, is the people that are lower down they can't learn, basically. Like there was many people that were against public education, why are we even educating people? But through the Enlightenment, people were like, yeah, we need to educate people, we need these workers to be at least skilled in the way that they work. And then what happened was we started streaming kids into academic and then non-academic. And you can still see it in today's classroom of, if you're in Alberta, there's like -1, -2, -3, pure, 30-, whatever people are doing. It's a very assembly line model. It's actually it parallels the factories that we actually were building kids to go into. Basically, like kids graduate and they have a number. They're the class of 2019. They're the class of 2030. They're the class of, like, we take them off the assembly line and then we're like, oh, you're good for life. That's fine. Good job. You've done. And in fact, we stopped their thinking since we streamlined education and them only wanting them to remember facts and figures, and they don't get this thinking called divergent thinking, which we're going to talk about a bit about brain research. And divergent thinking is that students can look at a problem and then think of multiple ways to get an answer to that problem instead of one way. In fact, little kids are very good at this, but as they go along in education, they become really bad at this. They think there's only one way to get to an answer instead of multiple ways. And we want to bring back that way that students can think of, there's multiple ways to get an answer. There's just not one right way. So we're going to go more into the constructivist theory and how that helps us as well.
So Adler and constructivism. So he thought that direct instruction is important still, because we can't just send a student off to do a problem, just throw some materials at them and say, go. They need to have at least some kind of base knowledge. I'm not sure if I put on this slide or another slide, but for example, we can't throw students to math centers when they don't even know how to add and subtract. They need to have some base knowledge first. But again, students must be able to own their learning through having those constructivist activities after the direct instruction. And this is why I think that Adler has constructivist thought. He never uses the word constructivism, and at some points during his text, it seems a lot more behavioristic, but I think he kind of bends toward that constructivist thought. Can you go back to the slide for a second? Yep, sorry. Yeah. He has said, for example, especially in those older grades, rather than going to a class and then reading the text in class with a teacher, students should already have that base knowledge, so perhaps they read that text at home, and then they can actually analyze the text and go deeper into it. So again, that's accessing that higher level of Bloom's taxonomy.
Yes, still
okay. And then like before I mentioned it before, he stressed returning to a more classical model of learning. So he has this quote, According to Socrates, the teacher assists the inquiring mind of the learner to give birth to knowledge, facilitating the process of discovery on the learner's part. So again, Socrates, he never told his students what to think. He would guide them to how he thought they should think, but he let them do the thinking for themselves. He would ask them a lot of questions and have them think themselves what the answer was. And he would just gently guide them towards what he thought was the best answer.
Yeah, so we were very happy when many of the UBC and the new education in BC is very much inquiry-based and all that. Like, it was very heartwarming to actually see this actually implemented. It was super fascinating, so I just wanted to say that at the same time. So, brain research. It was previously thought that children could not learn using higher functions, but more recent research has shown that young children can use metacognitive, so thinking about thinking, strategies. So brain research shows that it's important to utilize various learning strategies, multiple intelligences. The brain research also shows that experiential learning, so place-based, all that, there you go, I see some nods in the back of the room. Meaning that the brain can change through rich and meaningful activities. So brain research also shows us that we learn by pattern recognition, as humans learn through finding patterns. Children should be able to construct their own meaning through finding patterns in what they learned, and we should allow students to make mistakes, because it shows in the brain research that when students make mistakes, they're actually using more activity in their brain than when they actually just been told when it's right. So doing the constructivist way, students can experience that learning as well as make mistakes, and then allow them to come to an answer and actually build stronger and deeper connections in their learning.
And in that way, the knowledge is their own. It's not just something that someone handed them off to. It's theirs because they came to that knowledge themselves.
So, how are we going to implement this constructivist way in the classroom? Well, for instance, we can have students actually create something instead of being like, this is why this happens. So this happens a lot in elementary, and we're from elementary. So, as you can see, I'm very happy to be talking to actual adults. Sometimes Baby Shark just gets on your nerves for the 100th time. But like in the buoyancy unit, which we have in grade 2 science here in Alberta, it's actually getting the kids to build boats and then seeing what actually floats, what doesn't float, why it doesn't float, like getting them to inquire, why does this not work? Or why is it that metal boats, big metal boats, can shift across the water, but if you put like metal into like a tub that's square and flat, it'll sink to the bottom. So it's getting kids to construct meaning, to ask those questions, to get into a deeper learning experience instead of just giving them, here's why, and then this is my way, the highway type way.
Then I brought an example of Shakespeare because he's my boy. And I come from an elementary background, but I'm also very interested in English and high school levels. And I know a lot of people